Today's episode is particularly exciting to me because we'll be talking about two of my great loves, theology and ocean conservation. At the Blue Theology mission station, they, quote, strongly believe that science and religion deeply inform each other and are not mutually exclusive. Today we'll be talking with Reverend Dan Paul of the Christian Church of Pacific Grove and director of the Blue Theology mission station in California. We'll talk about how the ocean is, quote, a living call to worship.
When I was in college, I was a pre-seminary major as well as a business major. So I took a lot of theology classes and I studied Greek uh, as an undergrad, but really didn't feel a calling to go to seminary at that time. But then it was, oh gosh, 15 years later, where I relocated to get married. And the pastor of the church I was going to was telling me about a church. I was moving near Sacramento, and he told me about a church in Sacramento that was looking for a youth director. And prior to that, I'd worked for the Boy Scouts of America as a camp director. And so, with my youth background, they hired me. And then, oh gosh, about a year later, my wife passed away. And so I wasn't sure what to do next. And several people in the church said, "You ever think about seminary?" And I went, "Well, I don't know. I'm not sure I could get in. I wasn't a really serious student in my undergraduate work, but sure enough, I applied and I was accepted, and I just thrived there and loved it. And it was such a healing environment to be in as I was still going through my grief. And before I graduated, I was called to serve as the pastor here in Pacific Grove. And I've been here for 21 years.
Wow.
And it's, it's obviously not a career for everyone, but it works for me. And this very strong sense of call that this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Mhm.
So as long as that's the case, I'm going to keep doing it.
Yeah. And when did the blue theology part come in? Was that afterwards?
Yeah, it was about 12 years ago. And um, in my denomination, the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, um, the minister is not like a CEO. We have a board of elders who are ultimately responsible for the spiritual health of the organization or of the congregation. And we were having a retreat, and as elders, we're looking at a book that was written by a guy named Dick Ham, who was a general minister and president of the church. And it was called Vision for 2020. And he said, um, congregations need to quit thinking of themselves as parishes. In other words, this is the geographical location where people will just come to your church, and instead look at themselves as mission sites or places where they can do mission for the wider church and for the wider community. And so we thought about that. We said, well, what is it that's unique about our congregation? And mind you, we're a small congregation, maybe about 75 members, a half a block from the coast of the Monterey Bay, in a church that's over 100 years old. It was founded in 1896. And we said, well, one of the big things we have going for us is our location, is that we live in this incredibly beautiful place. And the people who live here are coastal people. They have a real connection, if not with the ocean, at least with the ecosystems along the shoreline. And we said, well, what if we, as our mission, brought the wider church here and allowed them to experience where we live and to study and to think about why Christians should be concerned about the health of the ocean,
Mm.
why that's actually good theology. And we thought about maybe becoming uh, elder hostel, but we didn't have the infrastructure for that and didn't really have the funds to create that. But then we said, what if we brought in youth groups where, they can bring sleeping bags and we can put in air mattresses, and as long as we have showers for them and a kitchen to cook in, they could live here quite comfortably. And so that's what we did. We invested in showers, and we kind of redid the kitchen and marked everything so everything's easy to find as if you'd never been in there before. And we started inviting youth groups to come here and spend a week. And while they're here, it's a learning, serving experience. Um, they get to do service projects like beach cleanups, sand dune restoration. They get to take part in a long term monitoring of sand crabs, which is an important study to look at how these particular ecosystems out here are either thriving or not thriving. You can tell by how many sand crabs are there. And so it's really important data collection, but it's also really fun to
Mhm. Mhm.
dig them up. And then we've also done things like eradicating the non-native species of plants that are along the coast because they mess with the ecosystems, replacing them with plants that belong there that are indigenous. But they get to do fun things too, and to learn. And of course, one of the big things is to take a walk through the Monterey Bay Aquarium,
Mm.
which is a place where you can just learn just by being there. You're going to learn, but we do a spiritual walk through the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and we take time to meditate and time to connect with the animals there, and um, we ask theological questions as we go through. But it becomes a really powerful experience that way. Um, the youth also get to go whale watching and get up close to the whales. They get to go kayaking on the Elkhorn Slough and see a lot of those animals up close. And and then just we have worship on the beaches, and we'll do meditation on the coastline, and it's really a full week. But what's been great for us is not only are we feeling good that we are performing a service to the wider church and the wider community, it's energized a lot of members of our own congregation to find their ways to help make the mission station work.
Mhm.
So we have next door to me, I have a fellow who's a published poet. He comes in and does a writing workshop with the group. And um, we have people that are quilters that help the group make banners and signs to take back to their churches. And we have other people that lead discussions on, like, what can you do when you get back home that will be healthy for the ocean. And we have groups that, we always have members of the church on any given outing that are there as chaperones, as well as with the adults that bring the youth groups. So it's really uh, been more than just our generosity. It's really um, empowered our congregation and giving them a sense of mission and a sense of purpose and ways that they can contribute to the church other than just financially.
Yeah, it sounds like this is a way to say, like, ocean stewardship isn't just for scientists. It has to be everybody, or it's not going to work.
There's a UCC minister down here named Deborah Streeter who actually coined the phrase Blue Theology,
Yeah.
and she lives in Big Sur, and she put together a program. This is actually what got us really thinking about doing this program. So this had to be more than 12 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. She had a summit at the um, Monterey Bay Aquarium where there were 50 marine biologists and 150 clergy ministers of all different faiths that all met for a 2 day workshops and discussions. And and I asked a few of the scientists. I said, "So why is this important to you to have all of us faith leaders here? And he said, well, he said, we're scientists. We're really good at facts and figures. So we know how to engage people's heads, but we're not so good at engaging their hearts. And that's what
Mm,
we need you to do. We need that information. And at the time we were talking about climate change. It was a brand new word. No one even knew what we were talking about. So we were learning about climate change for the first time. And he said, so it's one thing to say, here's the facts and figures, here's how the temperature's changing, here's how it's affecting all the different ecosystems around the planet. But uh, he said, we need you to get people to feel that emotionally, that this
mm,
is really important and this is crisis. And, the one thing I do love about, um, the mainline church, especially in the United States, Catholics and Protestants, is uh, faith. Uh, there's a spiritual and uh, you know internal um, way to explore and understand faith, but for the mainline churches, science is important to inform our faith. I think it's
mm,
awesome that the Pope used to be a scientist,
mhm,
you know, and the first woman leader in the United States of the Episcopalian Church was also a scientist
mm.
before, she went into the ministry, so that science will inform our faith. It's not contrary to it.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, and it provides that. Well, it's one way to provide that wonder and
Hmm.
similar reverence.
Right. And so it's interesting for us because, in a strictly science, in a community of scientists that might be, completely secular, they can still have this strong concern for the health of the ocean and for the planet and for the environment. Um, but as we do the hermeneutics to talk to the faith communities, when we start talking about, rather than the climate is changing, the climate is sick, and when we say God's creation is sick,
Mm,
you
mhm,
know, and if we take the ancient stories that human beings understand themselves to have dominion of the earth, and that word dominion not meaning we can do whatever we want with it, but rather we have a responsibility as stewards of the earth, then we say this is a calling of our faith
mhm,
to want to care for the environment, but especially for us living on the coast, we focus on the ocean because it's such a big part of the planet, and it really, um, there's some really serious problems going on right now.
mhm.
Primarily plastics, and you probably know that.
Yeah. Have you seen that the kids have a different or unique way of thinking about God?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's a there's not just one agenda for the week that they spend with us. We hope that this is a week they can deepen their faith as well as open up their understanding of the ocean and to become advocates for the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I told you, one of the first things we do when the groups arrive is we'll walk down to the end of the block and we'll sit on the rocks overlooking the bay, looking out over the ocean. And um, everybody has a little notebook to write down their thoughts. But the question that they meditate with is, how does the ocean, remind you of God? How is the ocean like God? That's what we start with, you know.
Yeah.
And I think for the Judeo-Christian faith, that was a big leap for theology when the ancient Israelites said, you know what, God is one. That's a big deal. Hear, O Israel, our Lord our God, the Lord is one. The idea that we're part of one big something. And I think that was an interesting thing in the study of the ocean is no, it's not seven oceans or nine. It's one ocean,
Mm,
one big ocean that circles the planet, and it's all connected. And that's important too. It's one big ocean with lots of different ecosystems and lots of different challenges, depending upon what part of the ocean you're in,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And and then for us in the, again, Judeo-Christianity, when you look at the ancient writings about the ocean, it was always this dark and gloomy place where sea monsters lived, and it was dangerous that you had to get on the ocean. And now I think there's this whole new light that um, what's going on under the water is this wonderful and amazing world where there are creatures down there that are kindred spirits and brilliant creatures down there. The octopus is just an amazingly bright animal, and the seals that are out there, and the whales, and how they communicate, and it's mind-boggling, and it's not hard to develop a heart relationship, as you know, with the sea mammals and the sea creatures. I mean, it's you begin to say this is important, and it's important that the life out there thrives as well as the life that's walking around on land, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you see have you seen the ocean as a way for people to kind of be united, like through different, across
Sure.
different denominations or different religions?
Well, sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, well, I think any kind of major concern uh, is great for what we call the interfaith dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
It's where, yeah, we all have different words to talk about things, but 90% of our faith is very similar. We just got different words for it.
Yeah.
But certainly when it comes to something like the ocean and the care for the ocean, when that's the concern, we can learn from each other different faith traditions. Um, Whereas, even science in a way is, if not a faith tradition, it's a wisdom tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So science and religion, there's even a lot of similarities there in that we are housing wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I do think rallying around, especially environmental issues, at that point, we come to it, again, I come to it through a Christian lens, but certainly I see people of all faiths or no faiths who have a passion for the creation. I see, these are kindred spirits. These are people that we need to be talking to each other and working together if we can,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah. There's this on your website. I saw there was this quote, the ocean as a living call to worship. And I just
Mhm.
love that. I feel like that just puts into words something I've believed for a while. And did you come up with that, or where did that come from?
No, that came from a hymnist named Dan Damon, who is a Methodist minister in the Bay Area. He's up, I think, in Point Richmond. He's the author of, I'm guessing, 300 hymns.
Mm-hmm.
He's published in every major hymnal of every major denomination.
Wow.
And before digital technology, I don't know if he'd appreciate me sharing this, but he used to keep a notepad on a sticker on his dashboard. So whenever he was driving, if he came up with ideas for hymns, he would write them down as he was driving. And evidently, Ocean is a Call to Worship came to him as he was driving from Santa Cruz to Pacific Grove. He was
Wow.
driving around the bay,
Yeah.
and that came to him. And I think he pretty much had the whole hymn in his head by the time he got here.
Oh, wow.
So that's in the repertoire of my congregation. We sing that hymn a lot.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
so cool. Yeah. Yeah, I just love the way that's
it really
phrased.
is. I'll tell you. Gabrielle, the other thing that always is inspiring to me about how I know that this is blue theology is important is, every day I take a walk. We have a rec trail that goes right along the coast, down through Cannery Row and into Monterey and back. And any given day, be walking along, and then you'll see somebody just standing there looking out over the bay, looking out over the ocean, completely motionless, with this look on their face, or like they're having some kind of epiphany, or they're having some kind of very deep thought, to be standing right on the edge of the continent, looking out over these great waters that seem to go on forever, although we know they don't.
Mm-hmm.
And 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 it's and to see that, somebody's having like this God moment just by looking at the ocean, that says a lot to me, and that says a lot why it's important to bring people here. That's why it's always very inspiring to me, as well as when we have groups that come here from the Midwest, or like, from Kentucky and Indiana. And so a lot of these youth have never seen the ocean, and to get to be with them when they get their first experience, when they get to walk right out on the edge and
Oh,
look, it's a transforming experience.
that's so special.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm from Michigan, so I always had like this. We would go visit the ocean, and when I was at home, I'd always have this like just this calling. I know no other way to say it, to be by the ocean. And for me, that's like the same feeling as God, whatever that like I feel it in my lungs. I don't know. It's like, but it's the same feeling, and it's crazy that there's such a connection between the two. And people
Hmm.
who aren't Christian like feel it too. They feel such a spiritual thing with the ocean. Mm. Do you see some kind of connection between baptism and the ocean?
Oh yeah, talking about water. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, when this church was first built, uh, in 1896, the congregation had been meeting for a couple of years. I think they incorporated 1894. So if you joined the church back then and wanted to be baptized, they would do it at Lover's Point. They would do it in the ocean.
Wow.
And I don't know if you know about this, but where we're located, we all of our water currents come from Alaska. So the water here is always cold, like
Mm-hmm.
really cold. Even the surfers wear wetsuits here because the water's cold. And so I used to say, boy, you had to really want to get baptized
Yeah,
to get out into the ocean to do that.
that's true.
But yeah, there's been a lot of thought, and that's something you might want to write about at some point. But the connection with water and Christianity, and all. By the way, uh, my church just got done reading through the Gospel of Mark. And one of the things that's interesting about that particular gospel is, every time the scene kind of changes, or the gospel is going to move in direction, it always begins with Jesus walked by the sea.
Oh.
Jesus walked by the sea. Now, even though that particular sea wasn't the ocean, and it wasn't even a sea, it was a lake, but it was a big lake. Um, I always thought that was powerful, and the fact that the sea or the lakes, but the ocean is in the Bible as well. I mean, they were in Joppa. Paul or Peter was in Joppa, so that's right on the Mediterranean. Um, that the waters are a huge part of the New Testament story of the Christian Bible. But even, you remember that the Pentateuch, Genesis begins with, it's all about the water.
Mm-hmm.
Everything was water, and so after light came this firmament to keep the water at bay so that the land would appear. So water seems to be primordial, and then there's all kinds of metaphor for that. I mean, we come into this world wet.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we come into this world, drenched, and baptism has that feeling as well. Is it to be some. We do adult baptism, so to be submersed down into the water like another death, and then to be born again, wet and drenched,
Mm-hmm.
coming up out of the water. Um, and and to think if science is right, which it probably is, we all came out of the ocean. All life forms
Mm-hmm.
began in the ocean.
Right.
So there is that connection. That is one of the life sources and needs to demands respect, and I would argue demands to be understood as something sacred.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah. My friend, she's doing her grad thesis right now, and it's all about the people's perceptions and how that changes how communities' perceptions and how it changes how they interact with the ocean, and
Mhm.
like what their stewardship's like, what their how their communities work. Have you seen a change in your congregation from the time Blue Theology started and their perceptions and relationship with the ocean?
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
I have. Again, I sent you a copy of the sermon I did last Sunday, where obviously the themes of being here on the coast were a big part of that sermon.
Mm-hmm.
You know, um, and if people ever looked at, since in this last year we've all become film producers, uh, you know, televangelists. I don't know what to call us, but since we're all doing video worship, um, we use lots of footage of the waves coming in, and the seals lying on the beach and the seagulls, but we use that as part of the meditative footage, because that does describe who this congregation is. These are coastal people. They're coastal Christians, and again, if people choose to live here, being near the ocean is usually a big reason why they live here.
Yeah.
So that's important. Once we started doing a Blue Theology mission station, we realized right away, well, if we're going to be advocates for, responsible care of the environment and and there's times when we got to say, well, what can I do? You know, I can't stop the plastic industry, but what can I do? As an individual. And so we went through a whole process. It's great. Our denomination, and I think every denomination has some sort of organization that helps churches become more carbon neutral and good at recycling and good at not using plastics and good at, you know, conserving energy and all the above. For the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, it's called the Green Chalice Program, whereas I think in the Roman Catholic Church it's called Creation Care Program. But you can actually get certified as a Green Chalice church if you jump through enough hoops and make enough changes. So, we had to get a committee of people together to figure out what changes that we could do, and then getting the right people to make those things happen and educating the congregation. I mean, we all had to be educated on how to properly recycle. That's not,
Yeah.
someone has to teach you.
Yeah.
And so we got through the certification, and then as tongue in cheek, we told the Green Chalice, well, since we're the Blue Theology mission station, rather than making us a Green Chalice congregation, why don't you make us an aquamarine Chalice congregation?
Oh,
And they did. So we're the only certified aquamarine Chalice church
oh, I
in
love
the
that.
country. And yeah, so we have a plaque and everything, and
Oh,
it's fun, but it's cool.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
nice.
That's
It's
very
nice.
cool.
And again, it is a sense of who we understand ourselves to be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The question, what can our church do? I like that. I'm going to hold on to that. And
Yeah. And again, and again, the more we dive into it, pardon the pun, the more we look at it, what our understandings are of what we can do to really be effective, continues to change and morph. And every group that comes in helps us understand something new and wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
So I also got to mention that in the last couple of years, we have partnered and have become very connected with this great organization out of Washington, D.C. called Creation Justice Ministries that's financed by the National Council of Churches. And they do have a group within the Creation Justice Ministries that just works on ocean conservation, ocean concerns. And so they've been wonderful with us. And so, for example, last year, we couldn't have any of the groups physically here on campus because of the pandemic. So we offered a virtual, 2-day event for any youth that wanted to do that. And what Creation Justice Ministries brought was something that was really cool. Is that it's important that we as individuals and as churches, we make our changes and we try to recycle and we'll do beach cleanups. But the big thing is to try to affect public policy when it comes to environmental issues. It's one thing if we quit using straws. It's another thing if we can get straws outlawed in our county
Mm-hmm.
or plastic bags.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually, this is my dream. The big thing is to have national policies about curbing the actual production of plastic
Yeah.
and and insisting on uses of alternative, more biodegradable substances. But that's going to be a huge battle, and just huge battle. In fact, John Oliver this week just nailed it. The problem with plastics right now, and it was just brilliant. And but anyway, we had this event, this 2-day event, and what Creation Justice Ministries did is they did a little workshop on how to write an effective letter to your congressperson or your senator or your city council, how the letter will be taken seriously and read. And it was great. And now we have all these teenagers know how to write an effective letter that's going to be read and considered, and doing that on behalf of the ocean.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
That's power, and that's not something we started out doing. It's something that we've learned. Boy, this is something that individuals can do that would really make a difference.
Well, I have one more question, and it's a
Sure.
question that I've been asking in each interview. It's the one question I've had the same, and that is, do you believe in miracles? And if so, how would you define a miracle?
Um, yeah, I believe in the miraculous, and I believe that there are instances that we could say that that is a miracle. Um, well, I would define it. I define the miraculous, I guess, as when when we have experiences or we're witnesses to something. The Celts called thin places where divinity is actually at work, and it's even more available and more perceived than what's going on like in the natural world. Or so I don't think miracles necessarily are going to be like Hollywood movie miracles, you know. Whereas more that I think they're small and they're easy to miss. And with that working definition, that miracles are when divinity is touching the human experience or touching the earthly experience. Uh, Miracles happen all the time, and they're easy to miss.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's the eyes that we use. If we're looking spiritually and thinking spiritually, then these things happen. And I just even think, when we have people in our lives that transform for no explainable reason, have these huge turnabouts, and where does that come from, and why does that happen? That to me is bordering on miraculous. I remember the first time I went to the Monterey Bay Aquarium. I was there with a fellow who was pretty enlightened, and we were sitting there looking at some of the jellies floating around, and we were both just staring at it. And he looks at me and he goes, uh, "Isn't it wonderful that there are still things that completely spark our sense of wonder. And I thought, yeah, there's miracles happening all the time, and they spark our sense of wonder because they're not necessarily easy to explain, and it takes faith to say that this is real,
Mhm.
you know? So I know that's not a real clear answer, but that's what came to my head when you asked me that
Oh,
question.
that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I've been reading this book by Barbara Brown Taylor. I believe
Uh-huh.
is her name. An
Just
Altar to the World.
hmm
And she just talks about how she talks about reverence so much and about how that itself is just honoring God and just being amazed by God in nature. She has so many examples. It's been a really cool book to read.
Mm.
Highlighted the whole thing.
Excellent. Yeah, she's a very good writer and a good
Yeah.
preacher.
Oh yeah.
Mm.
Listen to her. Yeah, well that's all the questions that I have.
All right. Well, it's a pleasure to be with you today.
Yes, thank you for talking to me.